So there are two things I want to mention right up front. Having, can you hear me okay? Having sat in the interview groups and having had many individual conferences, and just sort of monitoring the climate that we're in, the Buddha said something like this: of all the beings in the universe, there is none more worthy of love than you. Of all the beings in the universe, there is none more worthy of love than you. So I'm going to say a lot of words, but I hope you remember that and hold that in your heart for yourself and for those around you. There's no copyright on that. It's public domain. The statute of limitations ran out a long time ago. So please share that whenever you feel it's necessary, and particularly with yourself. When you sit and your mind is not quiet, or when you're in touch with suffering in the world or in yourself, just bring that to mind. The other thing is that the first thing that I heard this morning when I left the house, and Todd, you can tell me if this is right or not. Close? That's the spring song of the chickadee. And it's the first time I've heard it this year. So I'm declaring this is the first day of spring. But it doesn't come from me. It comes from the chickadee. I want to be clear also about the teachings, the Dharma. The Dharma is vast and subtle. And I need to offer the disclaimers. Do you know Michael Feldman's show? You have the 5 disclaimers. I don't know how many I have. A lot more than that, I think. And one is from the Buddha also, which is, don't believe what I say. Try it out for yourself. This is a scientific experiment in consciousness. We try these teachings and practices out for ourselves. And so the point of giving a Dharma talk, I think, is to in some way point in the direction that we wish to go and encourage all of us to go there in our own way. It's the only way to get there. My teacher, Joan Halifax, says, bring the Dharma to your life, not your life to the Dharma. And I thought, huh? You know, this is a Zen teacher, so it's what you'd expect. But what it really is, I think, is that we're not giving up our lives so that we can practice the Dharma. We're interweaving the Dharma into our moment-to-moment life. I remember an interview I had at a retreat like this with a woman who was living with a family with 2 children, a wife and 2 children, and the husband committed suicide, and she was there, sort of the nanny, but she became way more than the nanny. She held the family together, and it was hard for her. And this had been going on for most of a year. And she was weeping, and she said to me, I've lost my practice. And I just said to her, this is your practice. You're doing your practice, moment to moment to moment. She thought she had to bring her life to the practice and memorize the Anapanasati Sutta and meditate in a certain way. But she had brought the Dharma into her life and manifested it for that family and for herself. And all I had to do was just point that out. So look to yourself. If I can in some way help to point out for you how you are manifesting these teachings and these practices in your own practice and in your relational life, that's enough. It's really enough. The other disclaimer is, I thought Hillary Clinton was going to be our next president. I was sure she was going to be our next. I was completely convinced. So that's what I know. There's quite a bit of grief that's alive among us. Not just the normal grief associated with loss, but sort of a big grief brought on by the election. And grief tends to isolate us and tends to make us heavy. And so we've come here and we're in the presence of all these incredible practitioners. And we're not alone. We're not alone. And the sun is just streaming into this room. And the chickadees are declaring that spring has come anyway. And so we need to balance both of these, both sides of this coin. And that's really our practice, is to be with all of it. As Jan said, without preference, insofar as we can. David, in his talk, mentioned the inmates, saying that you can do the time, or the time can do you. It's so beautiful, isn't it? Many of these men have a way of putting things that just cuts right to the heart of the teachings that we sort of skip around. And it's so true. It's true in prison and it's true in our lives. We can do our lives or our lives can do us. And we do both of those things, actually. Sometimes meditation practice for me is like if you've driven through parts of Nevada and there's a sign that says, Next gas, 142 miles. And for me, it's the sign is your own tedious thoughts, next 142 miles. And so we're really doing this balancing act, I think, when we're doing this practice, between monitoring the energy, between slipping into drowsiness or dullness or boredom, low energy, or the restless energy, the racing mind, the sensations in the body that are painful or difficult. That there's this continuum. And we're monitoring how our attention is moving on this continuum of energy. And we're, as David said, it's an art form. And if we're starting to slip into dullness, then we bring in some energy. Maybe we straighten up a little bit, or open our eyes a little more, or deepen our breathing. And if we're getting too hyper, then maybe extend the out breath a little bit and sink down. And this constant awareness of monitoring our energy in our practice, which is practice for doing the same thing in our lives. And someone in one of the groups, I think it was Friday, said that they're working on mindful speech and really noticing what happens in the body just before you say the wrong thing. You're going to say this thing because you're thinking that you're going to say it, and your body says, uh-oh, here it comes, and the body is giving you all these signals, don't say it, and you say it. And then you wish you hadn't said it. And it's the body that lets us know what the energy is doing. The energy is too high. We go with that. It's a mistake. It creates suffering. The energy is too low. The body tells us that. Another person in my group said, I'm 70 years old and I just discovered my body. You know? Great! You know? That's not embarrassing. That's hallelujah, you know? Svaha. And in this discernment of this balance, we can give our energy away. We can let the time do us. We can let the thoughts do us, and we can give our energy to this wandering mind. Or we can back off and give our energy to the awareness, the space in which all of this arises. It's always a choice, and this is what discernment is for. Meditation isn't about getting a lobotomy and not thinking. It's about discernment, moment to moment to moment to moment. And so this brings us to the heart of the matter, I think, for this, which is impermanence. And so we're all aware of impermanence. Buddhists are aware of impermanence. Non-Buddhists are aware of impermanence. It's in our face, right? We know it. And I want to talk a little bit about the nature of impermanence according to the Buddha. And so it's said that there are two kinds of impermanence, and I would say at least two. The first one is moment-to-moment impermanence. And a good example, and a classic example in Buddhist teaching of that, is you're heating water in a pot on the stove. And the temperature is slowly rising, moment to moment. It's getting warmer. It's warmer now than it was before. And so there's this impermanent moment to moment change that's going on. At a certain point, 212 degrees, the water starts to boil and turns to steam. And that's cyclical impermanence, according to the teaching. This is suddenly it changes form. And that's impermanence as well. It's kind of a backward step from moment to moment. It's so that the moment-to-moment impermanence, it's not just chaos, you know. It's not just when the TV is on, no channel, and there's that. It's not just that. It's part of a cycle that's bigger, that's changing. I have a little Shiva statue here who's doing the dance of creation and destruction. And the Buddhists call this samsara, birth and death, the turning of the wheel. And the scientists tell us that there was a time before the sun, our sun, and our earth, and our galaxy. And that the universe has been going through these cycles of creation and change and destruction for 14 billion years. And that's just this universe. The current thinking in astrophysics is the multiverse, that this is one of an infinite number of universes. And this constant cyclical change, impermanence, is going on. The creation and destruction of galaxies, of stars, of solar systems, of planets, of life forms, evolution on this planet. Where are the dinosaurs? You know? So this moment-to-moment impermanence that we're familiar with and that we get deeply familiar with in meditation practice, and the cyclical impermanence of this again, this again, this again. And Thich Nhat Hanh's little poem about that is riding the waves of birth and death in the ocean of delusion, in the boat of compassion, smiling the smile of non-fear. So it's a recognition of this cyclical nature, the samsaric nature, the time doing you that we live in. Another inmate who was close to 50 years old and had been in for quite a while was describing to me the process of transformation. He was a mentor. He had reached a point in his development in his life where he not only learned how to manage being in prison, he became an example to other inmates and was made a mentor. There are mentor programs going on where prisoner inmates mentor each other. And I said, how did that happen for you? And he said, it's just like a washing machine, man. This is a big, tough guy from the streets. It's just like a washing machine. I went round and round and round in that washing machine over and over and over again, and this time I came out clean. I can't say it any better than that. And I'll tell him that I told you that. And so his practice has penetrated those walls, hasn't it? Those thick, high, concrete walls have been penetrated by his practice. And other men in that program, how did you transform? I'm always curious about this, how we transform. It's individual. It's bringing the Dharma to your life, you know. And they said, we got tired. We got tired. This is what Rosa Parks said. I'm tired. I'm tired of banging my head against that wall again and again and again. And there has to be another way. Please stop this merry-go-round. I want to get off. And that is the moment of transformation. And it's a permanent acquisition. Everything keeps changing, but you have seen the merry-go-round. And this is what Shakyamuni said. He sat under that tree for 7 days. And afterwards he said, I've seen the house builder. I've seen the house builder. And I have to think that he didn't want to get up from sitting under that tree. Jan referred to this. He didn't want the retreat to end. But he had to get up and share what he had achieved, who he had become. He had to get up and share that. So he reluctantly left. But he saw the house builder. It's the same thing that these mentors in prison, they saw it. They saw the whole pattern of their lives, the repetitive, samsaric nature of their suffering. And they said, I'm tired of this. I want to get off. And if they can do that, we can do that too. And I remember a moment in a long retreat, and I came back into the Dharma hall, and I knew it was going to happen. I was going to sit there, and my mind was going to go wild, and I was going to keep trying to calm it down, and that was going to happen for 45 minutes, and then we'd do walking. And I said to myself, I'm tired of this. I'm just tired of this. And when I sat down that time, it just occurred to me for some reason to just love whatever arises. To just surrender. And thought would come up, love it. Pain would come up, love it. Someone would cough, love it. And it was great, because suddenly people I loved started showing up in my meditation, and things I loved, and my dog, and things started showing up. It was an incredible experience, but it came because I got tired. This is sort of the other side of patience, isn't it? Patience is this great virtue, but getting sick of things, that's kind of denigrated. But I can do getting sick of better than I can do patience personally, and it just works for me better. So whatever works, but it's a recognition of the cyclical nature of impermanence. And I think in there somewhere, and you can discern where this is for you, there's also an evolutionary impermanence. Now, the Buddha, I don't think, knew how old the universe was, or that the sun was going to burn out in 8 billion years, or Darwin's theory of evolution. I don't think this was extant at that time, but it is now. And there is a developmental quality to our practice, to our consciousness, to our society, to our world. We are evolving. It's not all cyclical, and it's not all random. I think it's pretty clear. If you look to your own life, how have you evolved? How has your practice evolved? And sometimes it seems like it's just spinning and spinning and spinning. But sooner or later, the cycle is done and you come out clean. See if that's true for you. Sometimes it seems like we're going backwards, doesn't it? As a society, or in our practice. And I think it's helpful to understand nature and how that works. And Zen teachers love the sea and the wave and the ocean and the water and all these wonderful metaphors. And as the wave forms out of the sea and comes in, there's a leading edge and it breaks on the beach. And then what does it do? There's a back roller, there's a backwash, and it comes back. And the back, the 2 steps forward, 1 step back, is an unavoidable aspect of the wave going forward. We love it when the wave is going forward. It's progressive, it's evolutionary. But when it pulls back to reset, we're distressed. Maybe rightfully so, but we're distressed. There's a sense of loss, and there's a sense of destruction, and a sense of going backwards, and there's a heaviness, and there's a grief. And I think everyone knows that. We've really experienced that clearly. My friend Ben Sidran, who's a jazz composer, says that in times like this, it's a radical act to be happy and creative. And I got a card here. It says, everything will be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end. Not the end. Now, Mose Allison, who's elderly now, a jazz player, his take on this is, don't worry, nothing's going to be okay. Very Buddhist. That's the first noble truth, isn't it? Don't worry, nothing's going to be okay. We have expectations that Hillary Clinton is going to be our next president that turn out to be wrong. If we go in without the expectation, or with the expectation that nothing's going to be okay, then we're okay. There's another one I like, Genpo Roshi says, he says, I'm not okay, you're not okay, and that's okay. So why is this Zen practice? Why is this Zen teaching? Because there's this, and there's that, and then there's the next stage of the cycle. So there's grief, and there's compassion. And if we're only in grief, we're missing out on the compassion. If we're only in compassion, then we can go into spiritual bypass and say, well, we're not going to feel all that because we're Buddhists. Right? And so being the space in which all of that arises is really our practice. To be able to be big enough to step back into the spaciousness in which all of this cosmic dance plays out. Now, it requires some balance to do this. And in this retreat, we're monitoring what arises moment to moment in our body, in our mind, in our heart, in our being, what arises. And in the interview groups, we're also monitoring what's arising outside of us. Someone's speaking. So we're monitoring what they're listening carefully, and we're also listening to what's arising in response to that. That's meditation practice as well. And when we're paying attention to what's happening in the world, when I'm reading the New York Times or watching Saturday Night Live or whatever it happens to be, I don't want to get lost in just that. I want to monitor what's arising in myself in response to what's happening. And when I start feeling overwhelmed and despair starts coming up, I need to back off. I need to use that balance, that skillful means, to monitor my own energy in the midst of all this that's arising, so that I'm not swept up by it, so that the time doesn't do me, so that the events don't captivate me and I go into being frozen, so that I still have my own balance and my place in myself. When we go in and we first start teaching, and I'm talking, Joy knows this, and Walt knows this, Jan and David, and anyone who has gone in to teach meditation in prison. We did our first retreat in prison. I think the first secular mindfulness retreat in prison ever in this state. And it was organized by Jan Shepherd, who did a wonderful job of schmoozing with the authorities and bringing them cookies, and it was just fabulous. I don't know how she did it. I can't do that stuff. But this retreat took over a year to jump through all the hoops to get this retreat to happen. And we had 30 people in a room. And, the prisons are way understaffed, particularly since Act 10. And in a maximum security prison, there has to be a guard accompanying every prisoner and present in every group. And it turned out they didn't have any guards available for our retreat. So they could have canceled the retreat, but they didn't. We had 22 inmates in maximum security prison inmates, and 6 volunteers, including 2 of the chaplains at the prison. And we had a over 3-hour half-day retreat in that place. And when it was done, we had a little group discussion about, well, how was this for you? And normally in that kind of thing, or at least in the past when I've been in groups like that, people are, my mind's running and it's very difficult to calm down and I'm having this problem at home. And that's not what happened. To a man, they all said, for the first time in this institution, I've experienced peace. Sitting in a group of other inmates with no guards, I felt safe and I felt peace. And it blew me away. They got that. Now, these men had been practicing. We'd been coming in for nearly 3 years. So they had been practicing. They weren't newbies to this. But that's what arose for all of them. And, many of us struggle for a long time to touch into that. But because of the severe nature of the environment and what they had been through, the sense of peace was just huge. It was huge for them. And so we are not a Buddhist group in there. And so I didn't talk about that in Buddhist terms. But I would call that taking refuge. They found or created for themselves a refuge in the midst of that storm. And that is a constant storm. When we ask the men, what is the most difficult thing about being incarcerated? Usually the first and most common response is the other inmates. The second one is being separated from my family and friends. And the third one is the guards, the authorities. First is the other inmates. So to be able to feel at ease in that environment was a tremendous awakening for all of them. And again, they won't forget it. They've touched it, they know what it is. That'll always be with them. And the way that I taught this in the Buddhist group that we had was that the meditation enables you to sort of build an island in this stormy sea. That without that, we're adrift, and the sea is taking us wherever it is, and the storms are coming and going, and we have nowhere to be. And the meditation, the body, the breath, can be the island that we can take refuge on when the storm gets bigger and bigger, and we need a place to be. So taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha is fundamental to Buddhist practice. It applies to us when we're overwhelmed, when things happen to us in the world, when suddenly we have a chronic illness that we didn't have before, or out of nowhere our mother is in hospice, or whatever it might be. We're in meditation, and this memory of trauma just keeps coming up. How do we deal with this? This is what taking refuge is for. In my view, this is why we have the deities. We have Avalokiteshvara, Kuan Yin. We have the deity who embodies compassion that's bigger than us. It's bigger than our own mind. We can't figure this out. Avalokita is boundless and timeless and always available. And she has 1,000 hands, and each hand has an eye. And the eyes are constantly watching everything that arises in the world. Wow! How can we not utilize this offering? Or Kittigarbha, who's always present, no matter how deep the hell realm, Kittigarbha is always there. The Buddha, our own awakened nature, the blue sky beyond the storm clouds, always there. I'm encouraging you to take refuge. We're taught in this society again and again and again to be independent, to not ask for help, to be able to go it alone and make our own way. And what I'm saying is agency is important and independence is important. And when we reach that point where we just can't deal with this, we have a choice. Sherry said this very clearly. We can go into despair and suffering, or we can choose life. We can choose to take refuge in something bigger than ourselves and the situation. Whether it's Avalokita, whether it's the Great Mother, whether it's the universe, whether it's how we're evolving, whatever it is for you. Maybe it's the Virgin Mary. Maybe it's Jesus. Maybe it's the sunlight or the chickadee. Maybe it's the joy in your toddler's eyes. Whatever it is for you, it's there. Take refuge in that. Take refuge in the Buddha, and take refuge in your practice, and take refuge in the Sangha. That's why we're here. To take refuge in each other and to create a refuge for others. Those guys in the prison found that out by process of elimination, trial and error. that didn't work, and that didn't work, and that didn't work, and that didn't work. And finally, all I have is to come home to myself and take refuge. So, please know, the Buddha was a man who, or a woman maybe, who knows, who existed a long time ago. But the Buddha is a refuge here and now, in this moment, as close as the breath. There's a Native American saying that says, I go about complaining, and all the while I'm being carried by great winds across the sky. And I would say the great wind is your breath. The breath that was here before you were born, that will be here after you've died, that's breathed in and out by all beings, animals, plants. And when we touch the breath, we touch timelessness. Present moment is another word. Timelessness. It's just available in the breath. Take refuge in your practice. Take refuge in the breath. Particularly when things are being overwhelming. And right here where I am, yesterday we saw Sherry taking refuge in the Sangha, taking refuge in the teachings, and taking refuge in her practice, and having a vision of that choice. And this is why we need this discernment to always choose to take refuge, to do our time rather than having our time do us. Speaking of time, I have a habit of running over. Do you have that shepherd's crook I gave you? So I think I have about 10 more minutes. Is that right? Okay. Okay. Well, in response to the heaviness and the grief and everything, I'd like to invoke the 7th inning stretch. So let's all get up. Okay. Raise your hands up. Stretch up. And do the Dharma dance. Do in the Dharma dance. Do in the Dharma dance. Do the Dharma dance. Do the Dharma dance up high. Do the Dharma dance down low. Do the Dharma dance wherever you go. Do the Dharma dance. Do the Dharma dance. All right. Woo! Have a seat. So if you touched into, I put this on. If you touched into a little bit of joy in that dance, that's touching into the divine abode of joy. It's always there. It's always there. And you may not have done that alone, but we did it together. So we're all in this, and we can touch into this as a Sangha. So I want to finish with something that I need that joy to touch into. In an interview with with a lifer in the Supermax, I came face to face with something that I can only describe as a black hole. That this man was so violent and so damaged. What could I possibly say or do in the face of that? It really threw me. Because we want to think that we can come in and make a difference and plant a seed and people will transform. And coming face to face with this incredible darkness, and I don't mean an individual darkness, I mean a deep universal darkness that this person happened to be carrying. What came up for me was this question. Is there ignorance or is there evil? Are there people who cannot be saved, who are beyond any reconciliation? What is the answer to this? And I asked a bunch of people. I asked some Christian ministers, and they said, well, God says that everyone has the light of God, and so everyone is ultimately redeemable, even sociopathic serial killers. And I talked to a prison chaplain, and he said, well, that's the teaching, but that's really not true. I hate to say it, because he's in there every day. And I asked Buddhists, I asked a bunch of people, and I couldn't figure it out. It was really bothering me. And finally, in a meditation period, it came to me that the whole question of this darkness is based on the notion of a separate self, about this person. And in Buddhism, we're taught there is really no separate self. That this person is simply a manifestation of all of these elements that's come together and will at some point dissolve. And the angst disappeared. You may come to a time in your meditation practice where the sense of non-self, that there really is no separate self, and that everything interconnects, and that the ego is present but an illusion. That actually may come to you as terrifying. As terrifying. Madness. From the point of view of the ego, that's madness. Right? And at that point, we take refuge. And the question is, how do we hold something like this? How do we really touch into non-self in a way that's not destructive? There's a whole lot of cynicism out there. There's a whole lot of rejection of spirituality. There's a whole lot of isolation and the notion that we're alone in the cosmos and our life is meaningless. You see this a lot. And that's a choice. It's a deep awareness of interbeing, of non-self. But it's holding it in a way or not holding it in a way that it just becomes despair. You see people slip into this, particularly around death and dying or trouble that happens. If they don't have a sense of refuge, they can drop into despair, utter despair. I've seen it many times. So, if non-self and interbeing is really true, there's a blissful aspect to that. I think many of us have experienced this. There's definitely a blissful aspect. Just like the sun coming in It's happiness. And there's a dark aspect. And when the dark aspect is big and is present and is overwhelming, with the next breath, we can take refuge. And whatever it is, in the light of that awareness of the breath, mindfulness, avalokita, the Buddha, whatever it is, it will evaporate. I'm only speaking from experience. Okay? And the last piece is, I think a few of you maybe know this about me. So my ancestry is all Jewish, European, and all were, I have no ancestry. They were all destroyed by the Nazis. And when I was in Europe, I saw a monument with the names. It happened to be in Paris, and my name was there. Spiro was there 12 times. And so I had been avoiding this for a long time, but when I got home, I went on the Yad Vashem website, which lists those who were destroyed in the Holocaust. The names, 6.5 million, and their date of birth and where they lived. And I looked on there, and there were 529 with my name. So I determined that I was going to chant Kaddish for them, each one of them. Kaddish is the Hebrew prayer for the dead, because these people were not only murdered, there was no observation. There was no funeral, there were no rites, and so I wanted to, that was the only way I could hold it. It was too big. I had to take refuge in a tradition, in a chant. And so I learned Kaddish, which actually is not in Hebrew, it's in Aramaic, the language that Jesus spoke. And I started chanting it in my meditation in the morning. And when I got up into the couple hundreds, I began to realize that I wasn't just chanting it for them. I was chanting it for everyone. And I zipped right through 529 and just kept going, because it's endless, isn't it? The only way to be with that depth of suffering, and I don't just mean the Jews who were killed, I mean all the suffering. The only way to be with that is to take refuge in practice, in teaching. And the translation of Kaddish has nothing to do with death. It's basically, praise God. So-and-so has died, praise God. That's all it is. It's like, even in the darkest of the darkest, praise God. Ultimately, that's what we've got. And so in Buddhism, we say, even in the darkest of the darkest, take refuge. Take refuge and practice taking refuge moment to moment. While you're meditating, take refuge. Enjoy your practice. Remember the Dharma dance. You can take refuge in all those things. Finally, I just want to finish. See, I'm not going over. I have one more minute. My teaching, the teaching style that comes through me, is informed a lot by Zen and also by Taoism. And there's a story about 3 women who die, and they go up to the gates of heaven. And, the guy's sitting there. And he says to the first one, who's a yogi, he says, what do you believe? And she said, well, I believe in the practice of Atman and Brahman, and I've lived my life as best I could to do that. And he says, good, come in. And he says to the next one, who's a Buddhist, what do you believe? And the Buddhist says, I believe in the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha, taking refuge. And I've lived my life according to the precepts. And he says, good, well, you come in. And he turns to the Taoist and he says, and what do you believe? And she says, I believe you're sitting in my chair. So let's just sit in that chair for a moment.